Welcome back. In the previous segment, we discussed Lebanese politics under Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. We mentioned that he was re-elected in 2000, and in the process, I mentioned that he was moving Lebanon closer to Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf monarchies at the expense of its relation with Syria. So the relationship between Syria and Lebanon began to deteriorate. And on that issue, I also mentioned that domestically, Lebanon had become highly polarized. Polarization occurred between those who still supported Syria's presence and role in Lebanon and those who aligned themselves with Hariri and strongly opposed Syria's presence. Now, in February 14, 2005, a tremendous occurrence takes place in Lebanon. And what happens is that Prime Minister Rafik Hariri is assassinated in a huge car bomb that kills nearly 24 others. So when that occurs, almost universally, all the fingers are pointing to Syria as the culprit. It is widely believed that Bashar al-Assad had ordered Hariri's assassination. If true, as probably is, it was the dumbest, or one of the dumbest moves he had ever made. The assassination massively boomerang, and those who were responsible for the assassination really profoundly underestimated the Lebanese and global reaction to that heinous crime. As a result, there were a series of huge anti-Syrian demonstrations in Lebanon. These anti-Syrian demonstrations ended up mobilizing and uniting large swaths of a Lebanese population, which led to the creation of, again, this massive anti-Syrian movement. By March, almost less than a month after the car bomb, it was clear that the country was becoming very sharply polarized. And on March 8, we have a huge pro-Syrian counter-demonstration organized by the Hezbollah supporting the Syria. And a few days later, however, on March 14, we have this even larger anti-Syrian forces consisting of the Sunnis, the Christians, and the Druze that held this bigger demonstration. The latter's movement actually become dubbed as the Cedar Revolution, pretty much giving the West the hope that, like the revolution in Eastern Europe, this is the beginning of a major change in Lebanon in a direction that would be favorable to the West. Now, these two movements, the March 8 and the March 14 movement, become kind of a coalition parties known respectively by those very names. Now, in retrospect, when you think about what has been happening in Lebanon, and especially when you think about Syria's role in it, it really marked the beginning of a pretty rapid end to Syria's military presence in that region. The anti-Syrian movement had gained a lot of momentum. In fact, the momentum was such that it was backed by huge international support, and as a result of the international pressures as well as domestic ones, Syria is forced to withdraw its troops from Lebanon at the end of April after nearly 3 decades of military presence. So that's the situation in the aftermath of Hariri's assassination, leading to Syria's departure from Lebanon. Now, it should be mentioned that in the summer of 2006, we have another shock delivered to poor Lebanon. In that what happened there was one more war between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, it should be noted that throughout the 1990s, if I could go back and provide a bit of a historical context, throughout the 1990s and early 2000, Hezbollah was under severe pressure, both domestically from Lebanese forces, as well as from international body, to disarm its well-trained militia. The fear, of course, was that a Hezbollah attack against Israel would engulf Lebanon into war with Israel, and the outcome of that is going to be more devastation for Lebanon. And since, of course, Israelis' retribution almost always involved collective punishment, Lebanon would be badly hurt, and its economic progress will be stalled and derailed. Now, for its part, Hezbollah refuses to disarm, constantly arguing that the Lebanese army is simply far too weak to be able to defend the country and to be able to stand up to Israelis' aggression. So the 2006 episode is a war with Israel that was used by Hezbollah in many ways to justify maintaining its armed militia. So we have a situation in which once again the July war or the war with Israel is again upon poor Lebanon. The triggering event was the Hezbollah's raid that killed 8 Israelis and abducted 2 Israeli soldiers. Israel retaliated with massive bombarding of Lebanon. The war lasted for about a month, and about 34 days to be precise. In reality, however, the war between Israel and Hezbollah was a proxy war, because the war reflected the division between the West and the regional powers in the Middle East. So the best way you can understand why the July War was a proxy war is to look at it from the alliance perspective. At the international regional level, we have the West backing one group in Lebanon, the West meaning the United States, Israel, I'm including that part of the Western Alliance, and of course the Saudis. And they are confronting, in other words, the Hezbollah, Israel are really the proxies for the West versus Iran and Syria-backed group. At Lebanon's domestic level, we have the March 14 coalition of Sunnis and Christian and Druze who are against Syria versus the March 8 coalition headed by Hezbollah. And as you can see, the proxy war in the 2006 was that kind of a proxy war. So it was more than just Hezbollah facing Israel. It was the backers behind these powers. The month-long war resulted in over 1,200 deaths, most of whom were Lebanese, and close to 1 million Lebanese end up to be displaced because of the bombardment. And what you had was the United States openly taking side and supporting Israel's massive bombardment of Lebanon, which United States considered as a justified response. The truth of the matter was that we were hoping that Israel would be able to prevail and would be able to defeat the Hezbollah and therefore hand a huge setback to its mentors or its backers, Syria and Iran. And if that happens, then this was under President George W. Bush, then this would be a movement in the direction that he was hoping the Middle East would go, the Greater Middle East Initiative, which I mentioned in our previous lecture. In fact, the then Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, in her enthusiasm for the war, famously described it as the birth pangs of a new Middle East. This was one of the stupidest and the most callous remarks ever uttered by an American Secretary of State. The United States' open support for Israeli bombardment of Lebanon was really a major contributing factor, besides the Iraq War at that time, to make the United States even more unpopular and despised in the Muslim Middle East and the entire Muslim world than any time before that. So, in spite of the devastation caused by the Israeli bombardment, the very fact that Hezbollah, a non-state actor, was able to shower so many missiles upon Israel was considered an unexpected victory for Hezbollah. Indeed, Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, emerged as the most popular Arab leader in Egypt and many other Arab countries. There was something important also to be learned from the 2006 war, and that was it really highlighted the limits of Israelis' coercive power and violent reprisals, in that it showed that Israel really was unable to have much of an impact other than create a lot of destruction of homes and infrastructure on its weaker neighbors. It wasn't able to dislodge Hezbollah, and if anything, Hezbollah had become even more popular. Meanwhile, by November 2007, Lebanese politicians were unable to agree on a successor to President Emil Lahoud after he had stepped down as a president and there was a vacuum at the presidency level. So it is at this point that we enter another dangerous period in Lebanon, and that is the May 2008 crisis. What happened was, during this crisis, the Sunni government decided to take on the Hezbollah militia. Hezbollah quickly anticipated what was happening. It had the best militia in the country, so it quickly moved its militia to take over parts of South and West Beirut. So we have a real dangerous situation which can only be likened to a serious threat of a third civil war breaking out in Lebanon. Interestingly enough, in this conflict that was short-lived, the Lebanese army decided not to get involved and stayed neutral. With Lebanese army out of the way, Hezbollah came out victorious. But now, though, it was increasingly viewed by its opponent as just a militia rather than a political party. Now, after the May 2008 crisis subsided, negotiation between the warring parties began in earnest, and at the end it consummated in a May 15 agreement in Doha, Qatar, on the Persian Gulf. Pretty much Hezbollah got what it always wanted, and what they really wanted was the power to veto government policies and legislation. So they got that. So when you look at Lebanon from the period the Great Civil War ended in 1990 all the way to this period, you will see that the single biggest winner in Lebanese politics after the Civil War, without question, has been Hezbollah. After the Doha Agreement, in May 25, we have presidential election, and the commander of the Lebanese Armed Forces, General Michel Soleiman, was elected president. And shortly thereafter, in July 2008, we have a unity government formed. And then the legislative elections for the parliament are going to be held in June 2009. And so for a while, it looks like things are getting back to normal. During the parliamentary election, the March 14 coalition actually won the election, and that coalition was really headed by one Saad Hariri, who was the son of the assassinated Rafiq Hariri. So therefore, Saad becomes the prime minister. After long period of negotiations over the composition of Saad Hariri's cabinet, finally in November of 2009, another national unity government was formed, and that government was approved by the National Assembly in the following month. So things continued this way until around January 2011. The unity government collapses after 11 ministers, most of whom were tied to Hezbollah-backed March 18 coalition, resign. And the really triggering event for that was the opposition of the Hezbollah and Hezbollah-backed group to the UN-sponsored special tribunal on Lebanon investigating the assassination of Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri and the 22 others that had died with him. The UN report implicated Hezbollah's operative and Syria. With the fall of, and what happens with the collapse of the government, with the fall of government in July 2011, we have a new prime minister elected. His name is Najib Mikati, and Mikati government lasts just under 2 years. In March 22nd, 2013, Mikati resigns because of political impasse in the government.